It's high tide right now, beachgoers, so sit back at the cabana, grab a drink, and relax. Hi, I'm Saturni, and Verrier Knox. Ha! You thought I was going to say something like praise the sun, eh? Think I'm that obvious? Well, I'm only obviously that contrarian. Speaking of which, I'd like to talk about Dark Souls 2. I'd like to talk about a very specific under-discussed aspect of Dark Souls 2. One that, in fact, a lot of people complain about, saying it somewhat hampers their experience with beginning a new game. I want to make a case for aggressively reinterpreting this aspect, to force it to make sense that they would do such a thing. Besides, this being Dark Souls isn't part of the fun speculating about the vaguer parts of the experience. So come on, it's a new year. Make a new you. Let's go. When you start up about any RPG with character creation, you either sit through a brief prologue directly before it, or are thrown straight into the deep end to sculpt your masterpiece. Not Dark Souls 2, though, because it insists on being the odd one out at every turn. Honestly, why do you have to make it so difficult to defend you? What, am I supposed to use a shield? I keep getting told I'm not supposed to use those, apparently! When you hit New Game in Dark Souls 2 and suit through the introduction, you play a brief segment before you can actually make your own player character. But, and here's the weird part, the game hands you one first.
Who the fuck is this asshole?
It doesn't seem like that big a deal at first. You have some generic-looking hollow. That can work. That could be anyone under that ragged cloak and even more ragged flesh, including whatever imagined fantasy hero you have in mind for when you'll finally be allowed to make them. Except, you can go ahead and take that tunic off and find a masculine-presenting torso of a pretty average size underneath. This sort of shatters the illusion that your thicker Felicia the Brave look-alike was wrapped up in that raggedy cocoon, waiting to bust out like a beefy babe, bursting your biceps to barrel over these bountiful opportunities to bout verily, boasting the controversial, incontrovertible, boisterously big lance and shield board build.
99 strength, baby!
This also recontextualizes that bit in the prologue with the melting wax woman and child. If your character is any old schlub, they could be related to the melting woman and child any old how, but when I've yet again been assigned male, it narrows down how I'm supposed to relate to them. It means that, whatever my relation to them, I'm clearly taking on a classical paternalistic role, setting on my journey all the more likely for their benefit. But okay, I hear you saying. Let's deal less with the abstracts and get down to brass tacks. It's also mainly unsatisfying because it gives you something of an established character, and if there's one thing I've learned from my years of D&D, it's that you don't mess with a player's character backstory without asking. And all of this right before you basically destroy him, turning him into a lump of sculptor's clay to recreate that scene from Ghost with Whoopi. Only instead of making a vase, you're making a caster. As in spells. A wizard. So what gives? What was the point? This isn't even unheard of either. Dragon's Dogma does this as well. The entire tutorial has you playing as a clearly established character within the setting before you get to make your own. It's even far more blatant in that he comes pre-uncovered so you can see his generically handsome face right away. And he comes with his own name if you care to look. It's Savan. Yeah. I bet a lot of you probably didn't know that, because you didn't bother to look. Well, now you know. But, and here's the difference, that guy doesn't die for your character to burst out of his ashes like a phoenix rising. Spoilers for an 8-year-old game, he goes on to become a mighty figure that shapes the world you play in. And even an epilogue boss fight, if you care to do it. This undermines Dark Souls 2's tutorial segment all the more. This established nobody is all the more pointless and unnecessary by comparison to a game that actually goes somewhere with such a concept. So, why does he exist? Why this whole rigmarole? Why does anything exist? Why are you watching this video right now? To understand this, let's go back. Back to a simpler time, when pumping your strength and dexterity stats just meant you wanted to use a longsword, and poise was an actual game mechanic that did something, and we didn't get lied to about it for years. No, not that far back. The lore of Dark Souls 1 establishes the undead lose a piece of themselves with each failure, needing more and more fragments of humanity to restore them to their old selves. But after a point they go completely hollow, having lost all sense of self, reduced to mindless zombie dregs like the ones wandering the corridors of the Northern Asylum. The curse of Undeath in the Souls universe is a bit like a fantasy version of, well, Alzheimer's or dementia or that kind of thing. Slowly but surely your memories fade, and with them your sense of self. And once it's all gone, your name, who you are, how you came to be that person, you're little more than an animal. All that matters at that point is your instinct to feed and survive. It's funny. You don't recall how this rusty stick got in your hand, but somehow, swinging it at this human seems like a good way to carve off their flesh into more readily chewed chunks. The prologue cutscene of Dark Souls 2 establishes that this undead man, whoever he was, sought out Drangleic because the legends say therein lies a cure to the curse of Undeath. The melting wax effigies are clearly a metaphor for him slowly forgetting who those two were to him. All the more reason to hurry along, even if it might be a leap of faith. So, once you get done chasing those weird monkey dogs and playing keep away with the big hippo man, it's time to get to the actual game. You know, the full experience that you paid to have. This is the part where I turn towards the camera like I'm on an episode of The Office and say, hey, remember when you paid for a video game and it was just like an entire experience? It's funny to think about in a really bitter way. I'm only here because this random guy who I know nothing about decided he had to go on this journey. Pretty much the entire game lies beyond that door, and when you think about it, he won't be seeing any of it, because I'm not going to be playing as him. Within this humble abode, we find more of those red-robed soothsayers like in the prologue, and while their dialogue is important to examine, so too is their tone. They're being condescending and sarcastic towards you the entire time. There's a line in particular that stands out to me. It's the one where you're handed your first human effigy to regain your human state. When she gives you what is effectively a curative for the symptoms of your curse, she says, "It's a human effigy. Take a closer look. Who do you think it's supposed to be? Think back deep into your past. Yes, it's an effigy of you." But is it? This woman, Strohan she's called. Yeah, I bet you didn't know that, did you? Neither did I. I looked it up on the wiki. She's being facetious with you the entire time. What if that entire spiel is also insincere? The human effigy itself has a fairly generic human-ish silhouette, and you can come out of the other end of character creation looking wildly different. This includes being a person whose chest has to be covered up now to avoid an adults-only rating. So, what if it's not an effigy of you? This leads to a couple of possibilities. It could be that effigies take on the likeness of the humans that create them, and this was one such item left behind by one of many failed adventurers in Drangleic. I'm less sure of that though, since you can find more effigies on other corpses throughout the game, and your character doesn't suddenly change appearance when using them. Which leads me to my theory. That man you play as at first is, for all intents and purposes, dead, and you've hijacked his body. By which I mean, when prompted to think back deep into his past, he failed. He was already tumbling over the edge of going hollow, and by the time he walks in through that door, he no longer has any clue of who he is or why he's doing any of this. Let's go back over what that other soothsayer in the prologue says to him before you started being able to tell him what to do via controller. Your past, your future, your very light, none will have meaning, and you won't even care. By then, you'll be something other than human. A thing that feeds on souls. A hollow. A hollow, little more than an animal, with no real sense of sapience or self, but one day you'll stand before its decrepit gate, without really knowing why. You have to enter this arboreal abode to access the rest of the tutorial and things betwixt, beyond which lies the quiet seaside town of Majula. From there, you're free to explore the rest of the game. Often folks think of this line as referring to the king's sealed gates that block off the later portions of the game, but what if it's also about this very door? Whoever this man was, here he is. He made it. He stands now at long last upon the precipice. But who's to say he himself knows why anymore? This would mean that when handed the effigy, his mind could not project onto it his own visage. I guess that's a hard thing to do when you can no longer recognize yourself. So, maybe, just maybe, A long and distant memory called out to him, like a shout from hills over. Maybe there was someone in his life he'd placed onto a high pedestal, or someone he loved more than himself. And maybe a mind desperate for an answer clawed and scraped and dragged out any detail it could dredge up from the inky dark of a dying mind. Hollow? No. I'm human. This effigy proves it. Why, I can remember a human, of course, since I am one. Yes, that's a human, and I am one. So, I must be this human. Dark Souls 2, however brief it is, brushes on the concept, but it still presents me with one of my favorite things about video games. And that's existentialism. Let me ask you, who is it I'm playing as right now? Am I playing as this wizard lady I threw together for this video? Or am I playing as the man who got the entire opening scene dedicated to his coming here? Well, here I am. Perhaps the answer is one or the other, or maybe there's a third answer here. Maybe when his mind had settled on that idea of who he might have been, his soul and body alike came together in recognition of that concept, forming a new sense of self. So maybe the answer is technically both. Either way, here I am, standing over this lovely view, enjoying the calm waves. That stranger, that man, he was so close to finally reaching Drangleic. Or, depending on how you look at it, he did make it, by becoming the character that's here in his stead. Or, who knows, maybe I'm giving FromSoft entirely too much credit here, and making this philosophical supposition out of something their Dark Souls 2 team didn't put all that much thought into, not like me, who overthinks everything, because it's fun. Maybe they just thought it would be neat to start you in hollowed form and give you free reign upon completing character creation, because it would feel neater than Dark Souls 1, where they make you create your character and then give you your beef jerky hollow form to start off. Instead of going from one to the other, it's the reverse, you see. Who's to say? But either way, it's fun to speculate and theorize, though. Hello everyone, Saturni here again. Thank you for watching episode 2 of High Tide, where I managed to talk about the character creation of Dark Souls 2 alone for about 20 minutes. I'm gonna read the answers I got to the question I asked in the last episode. Last time, I asked who your favorite Steven Universe side character is. So let's see here, we got Eggs and Bacon Bits. My favorite non-main character is the one with the hair. You know what, Eggy? I agree. That's a good character. I just wish I knew whose hair it was. No Level Art says Onion. Again, whose hair is it? Please. Can we please? Why is it like this? Rebecca, why is this child like this? Please answer my... Please answer one of my dozen emails. I'm kidding. Best B. Best Buy? Oh, I see what you did there. Answered, my favorite non-main character is Padparacha, to which I'm gonna have to say, you're right, even though I'm also right in that Peridot is the best gem. You are also correct. Padparacha is the other best gem, and I love her. She's trying her best. It's time for the cynical YouTube stuff, so don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the Tidepool Orchestra if you'd like to see more High Tide. Join me next time. I have no idea what I'm going to write about, but I'm sure it will last a really long time and take a while. I'm sorry. This video's question is, if you play Dark Souls, what's your favorite type of build to play? For me, I'm really prone towards, like, dexterity hybrid builds. Like, one of my favorite things has definitely been, like, a dexterity pyromancer build. That's not something that's really viable in Dark Souls 3, though. because at that point, you're spreading your stats too thin. It would be much better to just go with, like, Int and Faith and get, like, the good Pyromancer spells. But at the same time, I feel like that's kind of a waste of time, because if you're putting points into Int and Strength, no, Int and Faith, you can use hexes, which are better. Dark Souls 2 had the same exact fucking problem, where, like, pyromancies did more damage based on how much Int and Faith you had, but if you're putting points in Int and Faith, you can just use hexes, which are better in every way. It's so stupid. It's so pointless. I don't know. With Dark Souls 2, I felt like pyromancy kind of became less relevant, and then in Dark Souls 3, not only did they have Int and Faith scaling for pyromancies, you know what? I'm gonna stop. If I start ranting about Dark Souls, I'm gonna be here all day, which I've already done. So, just tell me what type of character build you like to play in Dark Souls if you play Dark Souls. If you don't play Dark Souls, Skyrim. Because if you don't play Dark Souls, chances are the closest equivalent you play is Skyrim. Or Bloodborne, I guess. I don't know. Just tell me what type of character you like to play in your fantasy RPGs. See ya!